If you walk through life for a decade as a young man trying to draw strength from yourself, you're gonna lose. You don't have enough. It's not in there. Our own strength is minuscule compared to what the King can offer. My grace is all you need. My power works best in weakness. If I wanted to boast, I would be no fool in doing so, because I would be telling the truth. But I won't do it, because I don't want anyone to give me credit beyond what they can see in my life or hear in my message, even though I have received such wonderful revelations from God. So to keep me from becoming proud, I was given a thorn in my flesh, a messenger from Satan to torment me and to keep me from becoming proud. 3 different times I begged the Lord to take it away. Each time he said, "My grace is all you need. My power works best in weakness." So now I am glad to boast about my weakness, so that the power of Christ can work through me. That's why I take pleasure in my weakness, and in the insults, hardships, persecutions, and troubles that I suffer for Christ. For when I am weak, then I am strong. Welcome back to the Art of Suffering podcast with Dalton Darnell. My best buddy, the guy who asked me to start this podcast, sent me that. He sent me that right before the Pro-Am this year. And he understands deeply the suffering that I endure on a daily basis from my illness. And let me tell you something. Nothing gets me fired up quite like that passage of Scripture. That was 2 Corinthians 12, 6 through 10. And honestly, guys, this is what it's all about. So in Proverbs, it says humility comes before glory. In Philippians 3:10, it says we need to suffer to become like Christ, or that we are going to suffer to become like Christ. And this verse kind of gives us why. Because in our weakness, he is strong. Because we are weak, he can make us strong. And honestly, I didn't really have an agenda for this podcast or this episode. I more or less just wanted to share that passage of Scripture and kind of what it means to me. And honestly, what I want to talk about is the power of a good buddy and how life-changing it is. And I'm going to tell you a story. So when I was in college, me and Daryl Puckett is the guy who asked me to start this podcast. We've been best friends since we were about 15 years old. We played high school baseball together. We fished in college some together. And we've just been best buddies. I was in his wedding. He was in mine. I would not trade my friendship with this guy for anything. He is an amazing believer, a warrior for the King, an absolute unit when it comes to discussing anything. He is also a content creator. We both edit video for a living, and so we have a lot of fun talking about that. But I'm going to tell you a story about Daryl real quick. You can't imagine the life-changing impact this guy has had on me. So Daryl has always been a big church grower. He grew up in the Church of Christ. And if you don't know anything about the Church of Christ down south, it's a very legalistic denomination of the church. Very law-bound, very much so devoted to the rules, right? And me and Daryl have kind of led different lives in this way. So my granddad was basically a non-denominational preacher. You know, he was real freed up by grace and really preached to us how we were saved by grace. And the Church of Christ is a little bit different than that. A little more brimstone and fire, if you know what I'm saying. Not all of them, but that's kind of the word on the street when it comes to the Church of Christ, right? So Daryl started going to this new church called the Highlands, and it's here in Alabama. It's a big church, and the preacher is preaching about praying for your brothers and sisters and people who aren't saved. And how the story goes is they go around the church house and they pass out Lifesaver gummies, or not gummies, the hard candies, Lifesaver hard candies. And the preacher says, take this Lifesaver hard candy and keep it with you and pray over it for somebody you want to come to know the King. And then when they come to know the king, eat the thing. So Daryl takes this Lifesaver hard candy, puts it in his wallet, and starts praying over it for me. This would have been way before I started my journey with the Lord. So anyway, to fast forward, it's been about 4 years since he heard that sermon, and he continued to pray over this piece of candy for my soul, basically, right? And so after Dad read me Ephesians 2, and I really started to change things in my life, I called Daryl up, and I'm like, man, I think, I got some things I want to talk to you about. And so we start talking about it, and he's excited, just like all believers are when somebody finds the king. And he was like, dude, let me tell you this story. He's like, I got this freaking piece of candy back in the day, and I've been praying over this piece of hard candy for you for like 4 years. He was like, it took you so long to become a believer. I tried to eat it, and it was disgusting. I couldn't even eat the candy. We're talking 4 years, man. 4 years this guy prayed over this piece of candy, and then he tried to eat it. He tried to eat the piece of candy after I told him I'd come to know Jesus. And so me and Daryl have built this relationship of just sheer and brutal honesty. I am very candid with him, very honest with him as a brother, and he is the same way with me. And we basically discuss all facets of our life, from marriage to raising kids to being a believer to struggling with sin and flesh and just all of it. And so if you guys have people around you that aren't believers, keep praying for them. I truly believe that the believers that cut themselves off from the world and cut themselves off from worldly people really aren't doing what they're asked to do. I think we're supposed to be in it with them. I think you walk with these people and you love them anyway, even though they're just wicked folks. And that's what Daryl did with me. Even though I was not walking with the Lord, Daryl, he matched me step for step. And while we both have our things we struggle with when it comes to sin, he always trusted God with me. And I cannot imagine my life without his friendship. I cannot imagine where I would be without somebody who is walking with the King, walking with me. Because the guy is just, he's the kind to go to battle with you. And so the people in your life that you're looking at that you might not have any hope for, or you really don't think are going to come to know the Lord, you just keep living life in front of them. You just keep loving Jesus in front of them. And I've always said, me and my wife have talked about this a lot, that almost everyone, even non-believers, have Christ-like qualities. And we all have sin, And my sin is no better than your sin, and your sin is no better than mine, or worse, however you want to look at it. But the fact of the matter is that everybody's struggling with something. And being someone who loves the King and walking with people who don't, they're going to see a clear difference between just your outlook on life, just the way you look at hardship and suffering. And me and my wife were just talking about it. I count the ability to suffer well as one of the highest characteristics in a human being, because we're all going to suffer something, some form of trauma, some sort of issue, some sort of circumstance that we didn't foresee, and it's going to be miserable. And the ability to suffer well is a learned skill set. And when I see people who are good at this, who can endure and persevere and suffer and still have a good attitude and still enjoy life and still see the silver lining, these are all choices, man. A positive outlook on life is a freaking choice. Period. End of story. I said in the first episode, and I'll say it again, when I was a kid, I was pretty whiny, just kind of pessimistic. And my mom, every single time I was belly aching about something, she forced me to look on the bright side. She had this book in her car called It's like 101 things to be thankful for. And every time I'd go to belly aching and moaning, she'd give me that book and say, read 10 things out of that book. And so I found myself doing this with my own kids. And it's a learned skill. Learning how to keep your mind focused on the positive things in life is necessary in order to live a good life. I walk around every day with chronic pain. That's just where I'm at. And if I chose to dwell on that, I would be miserable to be around. I mean, you just couldn't even tolerate me. But I don't. I choose to look at it like the verse says, as my weakness is an opportunity for God to show his strength. Because while I do feel like I have accomplished some monster goals in my life, and I'm very proud of those things, none of it was me. And God's always made that very clear in my mind, is like I'm his vessel on earth to do something cool through, because quite frankly, my abilities are, I have none. I don't even know how to explain or how to cognitively think about the fact that there's 36,000 people that follow us on YouTube, right? 100,000 people on Instagram and Facebook that follow us. None of that is me. None of that is my dad. None of that is Joni. None of that is, it's 310, man. It's God's deal. And he has done something incredible with it. And I don't even know how he took the 3 people he did and turned it into what it is today. Another facet of this I'd like to talk about is from a father's perspective. So a conversation that I had this week with my own dad was kind of what I talked about in the first episode, is living life with him and working with him day in and day out really changed my life, because I had this misconception that he was perfect, that the believers in my life were perfect. And so I think it's extremely important for us as fathers to show our children that we have weaknesses. Because when they're little, and even as they get older, it's pretty easy for us, because we're a lot further down the road, to kind of hide our struggles from them, right? They don't have any concept of the daily suffering we go through, but how does a young man learn how to suffer other than watching his father suffer? And the father, in my opinion, has to be pretty vulnerable to show this. It's kind of difficult to take a kid that literally thinks you're a superhero and teach them how to struggle, how to suffer well. And so I think if we walk through life with this thought process of, I can never show weakness, I can never show my son that I am not strong, they're never going to know where the strength truly comes from. And that's the point, right? The point is that in our weakness, Christ picks up the slack. He makes us strong. And if we don't show them that, then they don't know where it comes from. And I had a friend of mine many years ago. Me and this guy fished together. We were best friends, and his dad, I saw his dad in Walmart, and his dad says to me, says, "Dalton, do you think my son is a believer?" And I thought it was a really weird question to get asked in Walmart, especially to a 22-year-old man. And my rebuttal to this was, well, does he know where to go in a wreck? And he was like, well, what do you mean? And I said, if the crap hits the fan and everything gets bad, does he know to go to Christ? And the guy responds, well, I would think so, yes. I said, well, then you did your job as a father. You know, we're all going to be idiots at some point in our life. We're all going to fall short of the glory. To me, the biggest gift I was given as a young man was knowing that if it all got really bad, hit your knees and go to praying to the King. Even though I wasn't a follower. And this happened to me basically my whole life. When I would get in a bad spot or get really angry about something, I knew that going to God was where I needed to go, even though I wasn't walking with Him every day. And so I think for me, something that I really try to do is show my sons that Daddy's struggling too. Daddy's having a hard time. And when Dad has a hard time, I draw my strength from God. Because in my weakness, He is strong. The thorn in my flesh is quite literally a thorn in my flesh. And I have a hard time. I cannot do things physically like I used to do. I hobble around here like I struggle, and my sons see this. And they have to know that the reason why I can keep going is because of God's strength. So if you're a dad and you struggle with showing your sons your weakness, I encourage you to teach them how to deal with it, because they're going to need it bad. They're going to need it real bad. And I don't care what the weakness is. And this is all age dependent, right? My kids are still little, so we have a long way to go. But as far as everybody with older kids, for me, I mean, you're talking about, I experienced this in my early 20s, or mid to early 20s, right? What a gift it would have been in those adolescent years to understand where strength truly comes from. Because if you walk through life for a decade as a young man trying to draw strength from yourself, you're gonna lose. You don't have enough. It's not in there. Our own strength is minuscule compared to what the King can offer. So teach your sons this. Teach your daughters this. Showcase this with your wife. Be weak to showcase God's strength. And be proud in that. Suffer well. If you're suffering with something and you want to reach out, you can email me at johnddarnell@gmail.com. I'd love to visit with you. I am weak. I am weak, but He is strong. Appreciate you tuning in and listening to The Art of Suffering. We'll have another podcast coming out next week, hopefully. I started rereading a book. Let me get it over here. I started rereading a book that was absolutely paramount in my journey with my sons. I asked my granddad one time, very, very wise man. I asked him one time, I said, if you had one book you tell me to read before my son is born, what would it be? And it was Fathered by God by John Eldredge. And so I'm going to read through this, and we're going to kind of talk about it on the next episode. I've read it a bunch of times, but just wanted to be real fresh for talking about it with you guys. And not only did this help me kind of understand the progression my sons were going to go through, but it really helped me understand my role as a father and God's role as a father and the representation that I am to my sons for Him, especially in the early years. So anyways, I'm going to read through it again, highlight some stuff, and we'll discuss. Guys, I appreciate you, and we'll see you in the next episode.